Story 1. My buddy's father died sitting in a lawn chair in the shade with a beer in his hand while watching kids play sandlot baseball across the street. He just fell asleep and didn't wake up. Didn't even spill his beer. Story 2. Chrysippus was a Greek philosopher who died of laughter after watching his donkey eat some fermented figs and get drunk. In some accounts, he was himself also extremely drunk. I feel like drunk Greek philosopher laughing at a drunk donkey is a great way to live and a great way to die. Story 3. My husband's grandfather was out to dinner with his close friends at a fancy restaurant, just to catch up after a long time. He had a lovely evening with them, polished off a big steak dinner and his favorite drink, then promptly keeled over from a heart attack and died. His family jokes he did it before the check came so that his last meal would be free. Story 4. Jesse Combs, former Mythbusters host and professional driver, died driving a rocket-powered car trying to break her own speed record. Story 5. She is unknown outside my family, but my great-grandmother. She was 82 when she died. She had been a widow for over 10 years by then, still living in her white house with its huge yard full of all the trees, shrubs, and flowers she tended so diligently. She dropped dead of a heart attack in her backyard one spring day, and it was the next-door neighbor who saw her there. Estimated time of arrival. This is, of course, my model for how to go out. Story 6. I remember being 7 years old when someone said this about an old sailor we vaguely knew, whose boat was found floating out at sea, abandoned. He was never seen again and was declared dead at sea. I got in big trouble for pointing out that while he certainly did love sailing, he probably didn't love drowning, which is presumably how he died, so he didn't really die doing what he loved. There was a long, awkward pause after that. I often wonder why my parents bothered bringing me anywhere, to be honest. Story 7. William Anders, a 90-year-old retired astronaut who took the Earthrise photo in 1968, died in a solo plane crash in the San Juan Islands of Washington a couple of weeks ago. Story 8. My dad. He loved road cycling in his Lycra. One day in 2006, he just never came home after his Sunday morning ride. He had a massive heart attack and died still attached to his bike in his favorite place in the world, Malakuta. I miss him every day. Story 9. Walter E. Williams. He used to say, "If I should ever die, I want to have taught that day." He had class until 10 p.m., one of the last classes of the semester. He died in his car later that night, getting ready to drive home. Story 10. I had a friend in high school who died playing soccer, literally what he loved the most. He was playing goalie that day, took the ball to the chest, and from what I heard, he collapsed. They were unable to bring him back. We were all 17 years old. Story 11. My cousin Sean struggled to find his way and finally got it all together. He worked for the Park Service and was essentially a professional hiker and camper. He was engaged to a lovely and gorgeous woman, and he died on a solo hike on a well-known trail not far from civilization. Sudden, unexpected, and difficult. He was young. Life was high, and he had all the things he was looking for. And honestly, what better way to go? At the top of your game, absolutely happy with where you're at? Story 12. Nelson Rockefeller died of a heart attack at the age of 70 while allegedly with his 25-year-old mistress. Death during sex sounds like the best way to go. Story 13. My childhood buddy Chris and my mom's best friend Rita. Chris loved dirt bike racing more than anything on earth. He traveled and competed all over the country. He never made it big, but that didn't matter. He went wide on a track in Alabama trying to pass a couple of other racers, hit a jump, and went wide. He probably would have landed just outside the track, but caught a tree limb with his chin. It didn't break the limb, but yanked him off his bike and broke his neck. Doctors say he died instantly and probably didn't know what happened. Rita and my mom love backcountry trail horseback riding. Long, multi-day rides with a club of big group of lady riders. Rita had apparently been quiet for a couple of hours. Nothing unusual when riding through gorgeous country views. When they arrived at a watering stream for the horses, they discovered somewhere along the way Rita had had a heart attack and died in the saddle. She never fell off or anything, and her horse just stayed with the herd. Story 14. My great-grandmother was an alcoholic and was banned from buying alcohol in the little village where she lived. The nearest town was across the other side of the main highway. One day she snuck across the lanes of traffic, went to the neighboring town, got herself 2 bottles of gin, and made it back across. She sat down, drank one of them, passed out, and died in her sleep, still clutching onto the other one with a smile on her face. They buried her with it. Story 15. Antoni Gaudí stepped back off the curb to marvel at the early stages of Sagrada Familia. He was loved, his design cherished, with a promise that it would be of the people, built by tithes rather than a wealthy patron. Perhaps it would take longer, but be sweeter for it. I feel bad for the streetcar driver. Story 16. I've told this story before, but I used to work at a riding school where we would also do beach rides. We live on the Scottish coast, so it's an hour's ride through the woods, then you're on the beach and you can ride all the way along it around 5 miles long. A colleague of mine took out an experienced horse rider who had terminal cancer. The rider said that this was going to be her last ride before she went into hospice care. So my colleague took her through all the pretty parts of the woods, and they got onto the beach just as the sun was beginning to set. They had a little trot down the beach, then decided to go for a gallop for the rest of the beach. By the time my colleague slowed her horse down after the gallop, the rider had a heart attack and died, and was still on the horse by the time they'd stopped. My colleague told me she was never too badly affected by someone dying on one of her beach rides because she knew the rider had died doing what she loved. Story 17. A lot of original serious big wave surfers are eventually going to die. They know that they've had close calls and yet they do what they do. Story 18. An online friend of my wife's was an avid participant in an online world she and he both enjoyed. One night, she logged in and found his vehicle crashed off to the side of the correct route. He had a heart attack at the computer and died playing. My wife called the rest of the usual team, and they all logged in and sat vigil by his character until a relative of his could log him out for the last time. Ever since, the surviving group members hold a memorial session in his name every June. Story 19. Go to Disney Plus and watch the documentary called Fire of Love. Those two, Katia and Maurice Kraft, loved volcanoes. It's a very interesting film, and the whole aesthetic is like a real-life Wes Anderson movie. Story 20. John Paul Sigmarsson, one of the most impressive men to ever grace the world's strongest man competition. Notable for screaming during a competition, "There's no reason to be alive if you can't do deadlift." Died of an aortic rupture while deadlifting in his gym. He was 32. I still use that line on heavy deadlift day at the gym. If that's my end, it will be an honorable one. Rest in peace. Story 21. Michael Richards, a black artist whose practice largely fixated on airplanes as a motif of freedom and the Tuskegee Airmen. He had an art studio on one of the top floors at the World Trade Center and was killed during September 11th attacks. Story 22. My neighbor at my first house, an older guy very physically fit, United States Marine Corps combat veteran of the Korean War. His wife had long since passed away. I found his body. All indications showed he was in the middle of getting in some of the old bayonet practice when he passed. I had always seen attractive 20-something women visiting him but didn't think much of it. Turns out they were escorts. Wherever you are, Bob, keep on trucking, you bad boy. Story 23. Christina Grimmie. Beautiful singer. Murdered by a deranged individual while she was doing a meet and greet after a performance. Utterly tragic. She was such an incredible singer. Story 24. A family friend in her 80s still lived in her own house, still loved to bake, and still made her own preserves and jams. The day she died, she was making apricot jam from fruit grown in her own backyard. She even climbed a small ladder to pick them herself. She made the jam, got it jarred and sealed, cleaned up, then went for an afternoon nap and never woke up. Honestly, it sounds like a pretty excellent way to go out. Story 25. Might not quite fit, however, Grandpa loved baseball, so one fine Sunday he and Grandma went to early church, came home, changed clothes, and he drove Grandma back to the church for a ladies' auxiliary day trip. He stopped and got some donuts and went home. That afternoon, he turned on the game and lay down on the couch in his study. He never woke up. Story 26. Tommy Cooper. a famous comedian and magician, had a heart attack on live television in front of an audience. The audience initially burst into laughter because they thought he was just being silly and it was part of his act. Story 27. A health teacher in my high school and his friend died from rock climbing. He loved rock climbing and would always talk about it whenever he got the chance. He went out with his friend to El Capitan in Yosemite National Park, and they both fell 1,000 feet to their deaths because another climber's backpack fell on them, making them lose their grip on the rock. This happened 6 years ago. Story 28. An uncle of mine, when I was 17, died in the helicopter he was piloting. He was a bush pilot at the time. He had done lots of small plane activity and had moved on to helicopters at some point. When I was younger, I remember us all as a family going on plane rides with him more than once, but I don't remember getting a helicopter ride. Anyway, flying was his passion. He died pretty much instantly, didn't suffer. He was delivering pipe or something to a work site on the side of a mountain. There was nowhere for him to sit down properly, so he found somewhere to kind of balance on one strut while they got him unloaded or something. But there was a vertical pipe sticking up out of the ground nearby that he didn't notice, and witnesses report hearing this sudden ting-ting-ting-ting as his rotors made contact with the pipe. This threw everything off balance, and the engine or transmission, I don't really know helicopter parts, tore free of its mounts and ripped through the back of the cockpit, taking off the back of his head. He was probably having a good day, doing some dangerous stuff in the bush, and with a bit of an adrenaline rush from the situation at the time. Then, before he knew what was happening, he was gone with his last memories being on top of his life goals. Story 29. My grandfather. He was a sportsman who loved cricket, boxing, and table tennis. In his retirement, he worked at a sports center when he could no longer play cricket. He helped raise money to build his local clubhouse, which stands today. He taught table tennis and was playing a charity match with the local police force. He won the doubles game, and his partner asked if he wanted to play a friendly game. He sat down and declined, saying, "You know what to do," and fell asleep, never waking up again. A girl who attended his lessons later went on to represent Wales in the Commonwealth Games, playing table tennis in Manchester a few years later. Story 30. Paul-Henri Nargeolet, the French deep-sea explorer, died in the Titan submersible implosion last year. Given he was a deep-sea explorer for much of his life, in addition to being a well-known Titanic expert and artifacts collector who visited the site on many famous expeditions since the 1980s, it felt like a fitting demise. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for the unwitting paying passengers. Story 31. My uncle and aunt both passed away together, sitting on their chairs in the living room watching television. They both lived in assisted living bungalows, and caretakers were there immediately when they sensed something was wrong. Their 2 cups of tea were still warm on the coffee table when they were found. Story 32. There is this Netflix documentary, The Deepest Breath, about people who practice free diving. Usually in open waters, one goes as deep as they can in a single breath. Multiple people lose their lives. I would say them horrible death though. Story 33. My cat, Mr. Cat, loved to pick fights with our other cats. He got out one day when people renting one of our units were moving in. We heard a huge cat fight in our neighborhood 3 days later and we knew it was him. Sure enough, he came hobbling back in an hour. He passed 3 days later due to a traumatic diaphragm rupture. Rest in peace, you dense soul. I love you so much. Story 34. Jane Little, a bass cellist for the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra, died at 87. She had been with the orchestra for 71 years. She died of a heart attack suffered while performing on stage. What was the orchestra playing at the time she lost consciousness? There's no business like show business. Story 35. John Entwistle, bassist for The Who, died at 57 in a hotel room with a pound of cocaine and a 20-year-old stripper. Which one actually killed him is anyone's guess. Story 36. A friend of my grandma's loved soccer since he was a kid. My grandma told me stories about how he was really talented, and all he lived for was soccer. She hasn't really told me why he didn't go professional. He was playing alone, practicing for his tournament the next day on a very hot day, and drank cold water. He died on the spot. Story 37. Jim Fixx is credited with helping start America's fitness revolution by popularizing the sport of running and demonstrating the health benefits of regular jogging. He died of a heart attack while jogging at 52 years of age. Story 38. The people on Mount Everest, I would say. It sounds miserable to me, but everyone who went up there and did not come back down all the way must have wanted very badly to be there. They paid a lot, trained a lot, and absolutely accepted the risk. That mountain is a testament to dying doing what you love. Story 39. Probably obscure reference, but one of the volcanologists studying Mount St. Helens was David Johnston. He was with the United States Geological Survey and was working on ways to predict volcanic eruptions. If I recall correctly, he volunteered to gather data on Mount St. Helens when it started showing seismic activity in late 1979 or early 1980. He was the first to report the 1980 eruption with the words Vancouver. Vancouver. This is it. Before he died. I cannot speak for his thoughts and last moments, of course, but he had gone out with a geologist colleague the evening before and told her to go home while he stayed at the observation site, where he died alone.